Hey, what's going on? Just gonna let people roll in here for a little bit. Happy Saturday. Um, Hope the mic and everything sounds good. Just got a new mic this week, so been testing it out. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. Um, Today the agenda is to be going over this guy right here. Um, all built in After Effects and no third-party plugins. So last year in May, I built this guy just because I had been like messing around with a couple different built-in effects and like wanted to see if I could like build something that looked like a little bit more complex and something that I hadn't really seen before. Um, and that's kind of something that I do a lot when I don't really have a set project that I want to like build out or something that I want to be like super fast. I'll just do these like quick little things. And this, I mean, mainly is built off of vector blur inside of After Effects, which has been there for as long as I can remember. And I think like the first time I remember it being used was like some video copilot tutorial a bit ago for like an electricity field, and I was like, that looks cool. I wonder if I could like make that look into this. Like, my idea is like this Scanline sort of like microscopic. You can see it's called just like organic growth, and I just thought that this was like an interesting use of it. This is a bit more how it looks usually, but this is what we're gonna kind of be going over, breaking down. Hard part about live is that as people come in, they'll be kind of a little bit behind, and it's like a very linear workflow. And then just going over the different things that can kind of spice up different little looks. I did like a couple tweaks to this. I had like 3 posts of different kinds of animations. And so I'm just going to be kind of building the base that all of those are built off from scratch. And then if there's like any questions or anything of like how to add little different variations to it, I'm going to go into those a bit. But yeah, I guess we're just going to jump into it right away. So, I mean, all just built in After Effects, and the way that I'm going to kind of go over it is breaking down. It's kind of built into 2 parts. So it's just the noise that kind of builds it up. I'm just going to go over this really quick, kind of as like a top view, and then kind of explain why some of the things are set up. So I built it in these 2 different parts just because of kind of wanting to have a base that I could do a lot of tweaks in before it came into like the second phase of the effect, which kind of like brings it all together and like does the final kind of vector blur processing on top of it, but keeping it in here to do sort of all the animation and evolution bits of it. It was just easier to keep it separated in my head that way. So just go over this really quickly. A lot of the effect, it changes really drastically with little tiny adjustments here and there. So we have just our noise, which is just a fractal noise, and you can see this is just all the animation is at the very base of it. I wanted this like kind of zooming in effect, so it's just scaling the noise because I wanted it to feel like we were going even deeper and like kind of notching in the dials of like a microscope. And then there's just all these processes on top of it that animate it kind of in and out for what we need it to do. And you can kind of already see how all these like just different, those 2 little effects on top of it get us closer to that like blobby organic cell sort of like movement. And that was kind of the key thing where I was like, oh cool, this would look great with like something that could kind of give more detail inside of those things. And so like if we go in here, it's just those couple processes of like kind of, it makes you not feel like you're looking at just a noise pattern because these blobs merge in and kind of join each other in different areas and fade out a lot more organically than something that is just kind of back at this level of just like moving around, and you can kind of always see the pattern there the whole time was a different kind of process that I just put on top of it. And we'll kind of go into all those little parameters later. And so then I just kind of brought it into this new layer that I was going to do all the final kind of touches on. And so the base, I just did this quick kind of set matte to luminance to really clamp and clean up the edges of that blurred shape, and then reblurred them because I kind of wanted it to have like clean edges in the beginning, but those were like too crisp for the process after. Then we just have our vector blur, which really drives a lot of the effect, and this is kind of where I spent most of my time tweaking. If you've never used it, it's kind of, once you've seen it used once, you can kind of see it used where it's used like everywhere in different little effects and stuff. But it's, the best part about it is it blurs, but in a super smooth way on the inside of different things. And I've never actually used it for its proper use. I've only kind of used it to add these stylized sort of things. But the other great benefit is that it blurs, but it keeps things in their respecting other boundaries of these values. So we have like all of this, and if we did any other sort of blur, we would just keep kind of smushing these together. But it kind of reads the in-between values and it blurs, but also keeps those there. And that's where you get these super nice organic shapes where they're sort of cellular in the fact that they'll come really close to touching each other in their blurred state, but they'll keep these hard edges. And that's kind of the main thing driving this effect. I'll go into all the little parameters after this, and then I just scaled it up a bit because vector blur, it happens on all of the edges, and I kept getting, in some cases, weird edges that kind of like bled off into this weird shape, and so just using a transform to kind of boost it by a little bit. I think it's like just a tiny bit. Yeah, 103. So it's just a little bit bigger. And then in this one, you can kind of see there's this like scan line happening the whole time. And the reason that this isn't a one-to-one is I built that last year and could not for the life of me find that file. So I just rebuilt this one this week, which is pretty close to the same exact steps I took last time, just without the scan lines on top of it. And I think, if I remember correctly, that was a super hacky thing of just having, so if you just make a solid here, let me just really quickly go into this, a solid that I just, in its, just the Y position, so separated the dimensions. I mean, you can do that later inside of the expression, but it's essentially just doing this. It's jumping around the frame and randomly splitting it at a super low percentage. So if you just drop down all of this, and I'm actually going to do this in a separate so we can actually see it in real time. So I'm just going to make a new comp for us. We don't want it to be in that ratio. We want it to be a square. So just going to 1080. Cool. So if we have our blocker and our background, and then we just go to position, separate dimensions, so it's a little bit easier to work on. It's just as easy as knowing that, so like 0, we'll keep it halfway up, so negative 540. We'll keep it totally out of the frame. And, you know, then it's full all the way down here will be, which would be 1080 plus 540, whatever that math is, exact number. So those are kind of the ranges that it has to move. So it has to move from negative 540 all the way to 1620 to totally clear the frame. But that's kind of the amount that we need it to move. So if we set a wiggle for that guy, and I wanted it to be, I think we're at 30 frames here. If I check really quick. Control K, yeah, we're at 30. So the wiggle just takes in how many times you want to do it, and then needs the other number to be the amount that it does. So we could do it for half so that it could maybe get stuck on a couple. And then the distance that it needs to travel is relative to where we put it. So if we put it back at 540, we know that we need it to go negative 1080 to get totally out of the frame, right? And then we need it to go positive 1080. So because we're not putting a floor on this, this will go positive and negative. So we can just do 1080. And that kind of starts to get you this effect, which I guess probably like a flash warning for that. But this is how I get my scanline effects really quick and dirty, which you can see here again. You can really faintly see it. I turn it down to like something super low. 5 might be even too much. I'm not sure if that will come up over stream, but maybe even 3. It's just a super quick and dirty way to get a lot of like grunge and visual interest inside of it without really having to do anything except for like a tiny little wiggle expression. And it looks super correct for some reason. It's just so simple, but I think it adds a lot of visual interest. So if we just take this guy, bring him back into this comp, he's probably going to be way too small. He is way too small. But if we did the same exact thing, we can have that scan line back in there. But back to the original part of this. I'm just going to call that scan line for later. Scan line. Okay, so let's actually go into the recipe behind this, everything that's happening under the hood and why. And by no means are these the only ways you can do this. That's the thing that I love about this, is that one, change of the noise type completely changes the rest of it, and that's why I kind of had a ton of fun in like what I was doing and the different kind of looks that I could get out of it really quick after this whole setup was kind of built. So if we go into the noise, just dropping down a typical fractal noise, and the best results that I got were using the threads, because when threads are animated, they kind of keep in these channels or like in this grid. They animate different shapes, but if we switch this to something like basic, or basic's pretty close, but where were we? This one. So this changes a lot over its animation. Like all these lines kind of move in different areas, which, is great for certain use cases. But for this one, I kind of wanted it to seem a little bit more structured. And so when the animation is added to this one, you can see dark areas and light areas move around, but they keep these kind of thread-like shapes. And that was the first thing that I really wanted, was to have a whole grid system kind of built up even when the evolution was animated. And that's, I guess, just the next thing is like, if we go down and look at just to look at everything that's animated, it's just the scale and evolution. Those are the only two things that are animated. But the other thing that I had to adjust was, normally we always get our noises, and it's good to have your noises at a high complexity so you get a lot of visual or a lot of detail inside of all of your little areas. But for me, the process of this just gave vector blur way too much information to blur. And so it works a lot better if you keep your values super low and super clean, and it's just like nice gradient fall-offs. And so that was something that I had to play around with a lot. And I mean, you can, so if I turn this back up to 6, and we turn all of our stuff back on, we clamp it and everything, bring it all back, you can get these like super crazy shapes, but it just stops looking like blobs and like little cells. It starts to just be a little bit too chaotic everywhere. We'll bring it back down to 2. gets you a little bit closer to these like super blobby shapes. And so that's why the complexity is cranked all the way down. And then the other thing is just your scale. Didn't really do anything except for changing the noise type. So this also has a drastic effect on kind of what all your stuff is going to look like. And I found the best result for this kind of cellular blobby morph stuff was set to soft linear. It gave the best results. And so that's everything on the noise. I'll go back to it and kind of show a little bit of adjustments that can be made there, and different things of like adding and multiplying different noises on top for a little bit different results. But this is the base of everything. But for mine, I kind of wanted it to, and you can see in here, start off with like total black and just have like the blobs kind of appear and then kind of animate around and then fade off. And so knowing that everything, if I wanted to clamp everything just from there, and we just add a levels, if I start to bring in more black, it's the reverse effect. I'm going to start to just see blobs right away and then see everything else. So inverting it before then kind of lets the clamp do a better masking job of being able to mask all these little edges around where our blobs are and then reveal them, and so that we get darker spots. And I just felt that the white background majority worked better because it was kind of, a little bit weirder to see white blobs on a black background. So having it this way was a lot better. And then just animating the clamp was the only other adjustment there. So just going up, and right now it's totally all the blacks are crushed up, and then just keyframing the levels there to reveal it kind of in the middle, and then clamp it back the other way just to make a nice looping point there. So that's the entirety of the base. And then when it goes into our next stage of the vector blur, there's just the set matte, which actually removes the entire black parts because it's set to luminance, and then a Gaussian blur on top of that, just slightly. So if we take the vector blur and just do it on top of this without the blur set, it was just a little bit too crisp everywhere. And this changes what the blur inside looks like. So all these edges are a little bit softer instead of like super crisp, but without the set matte clamping that, it's a way different result, and this just gave a lot better tones. And these are not really how any of this should be used. Hey, player 2, what's up? What type of tool are we creating? So we're just going through After Effects and kind of recreating, sorry, totally forgot to be looking at the chat. We're just recreating this animation that I made. And this is done inside of After Effects. Just creating these like cell-like blobs. A lot of people have been asking for this ever since I posted it. And yeah, so we're just kind of going through the process there just to get everybody caught up. So we've just kind of made this noise just from the fractal noise shelf tool, animated its scale and evolution, and then inverted it and clamped it and animated our clamp so that we kind of start with this big black chunk, and then we reveal all the edges, we get our blobs, and then we just clamp it back up. Yeah, it's definitely not a normal way that people use a lot of this stuff in After Effects, but it's super fun. Hey, Gleepic, what's up? Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, super bacteria-esque. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what I like to do inside of After Effects, is kind of just do R&D, but not in a typical way of like a motion graphics. I mean, I don't really even know what this would be used for. But I mean, it's nice to have in your back pocket if you want to kind of create something for like a title sequence or something, and you want to like not have to like dig through a bunch of stock footage. You could definitely use this sort of thing to make like nice cellular chunks super art directable. And maybe we could go over that of like, instead of basing it solely off noise, we could just add in our own couple of shapes here and there and see how those work. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. And so let's see, where were we? Yeah, so we were just adding all of these different effects back on top of our noise to help kind of clean up the shape, give it a little bit more of like a less digital approach with this little soft edge on top. And all of this stuff kind of comes through just like going so far into the effect of like adding little things on top of it here, just to, and this definitely isn't a linear process. I normally would start with just like the noise, and then I would throw it inside and like look at what's happening on the effect that I know is going to kind of drive this thing. And I'm like, okay, right now we're just like, you can't even tell what's happening, not even close to like cellular blobs. So what can we do to helpfully separate these away from each other and have more of a white background? And that's kind of what drives these decisions, where it's like, oh, if I invert it and I clamp it a bit, we can kind of get our shapes to separate from each other, and then you get a lot closer to this. So it's a lot of back and forth, and kind of once you build the base of your effect, which I would think would just, just be a noise and a vector blur, there's all these little things that pop up in between that you can do to help kind of art direct it in the way that you want it to look. But that kind of comes along with like, none of these things are the only way to do this. This is just a couple things that we can do. And then our vector blur. So this to this is kind of insane that it does that just pretty much by default. But if we just add a vector blur from scratch, you can kind of see the little bit of tweaks. So if we just do vector blur, nothing happens, right? Because we haven't changed the amount. So it pretty much is the default. I didn't actually change anything except for the rigid smoothness. Just bringing that down a little bit, and that really changes your overall shape. So this looks a lot more like just the base, but as you bring down the smoothness, you get that kind of weird cell looking shapes everywhere. But I thought the 0.5 was like just as much as you could bring that down. All these things, which is super cool, really change the effect around. So this just looks completely different. And this is just unnatural. There's also like 4 other different types of vector blurring. They all do their own sort of kind of look. I'm sure that there's a real reason for these, but I've never actually used it for that. Directional growth is super cool for a lot of stuff. Not really cell-like things, but it takes and kind of just like makes these insane spirals out of everything. I've used this a lot for different like bump map materials that I've had animated, and it kind of just gives this like nice like painterly swirl around everything. And there's a bunch of little things that you can do, kind of breaking away from just this like shapes that we get here. And so we have this kind of general shape, but if you want to give it a little bit more visual interest, we can go down, and after all of its blur and everything, if we just add a scatter, you can see super tiny in here. It just starts to separate all of the pixels and kind of like blur them in different areas. And you wouldn't think that that would affect a blur really. This, like if we did this to something and then added another, like Gaussian blur or a fast blur. Let's do a fast blur. On top of that, it really doesn't affect it. It's like, okay, cool, I see that you have it, and I just blur it all away. But because vector blur is looking for those differences in between the values, like super detailed, if you add that, you get all these insane tiny little hairs everywhere. So if we go back to this kind of blurring, you see it adds like this almost like wood grain-esque ink spill sort of effect to everything. And I've definitely used that a couple times as just a really quick way to add like visual detail inside of there without really having to sacrifice the overall shape. And the less scattered, the cleaner your lines will be. So if we crank that up insane, we'll get something really weird. That doesn't even look like our original shape anymore. But, you know, just a little bit, and then we can change the vector blurring that we're doing to be a lot crazier and pick it up a lot more. Or a lot less. That looks a lot more like an ink blot. Add a little bit more of it. Yeah, pretty crazy. And then this looks really insane when we go over and we kind of do it into a directional center or something like one of these ones that really, it kind of makes it way sketchier, like a sketched drawing, because before when we didn't have any scattering, the edges were super clean and it didn't really have anything to do with this effect. But the moment we add that in, it has kind of a lot more variation inside the levels to start doing these sort of crazier operations on top of it. But that is not the effect I was going for. Other things, if we bring this back, just a natural. So this gets kind of our blobby shapes, and then they sort of join up again into these massive blobs just because of all of our levels. And so right now there's not much gradient or gradation happening as we had here, so we don't get as many cool like little splits off like this. We just kind of start to dominate it back again with black and these like little edges. And then something that, I mean, we could add on top of this would just be if we take another adjustment layer and we just add like a glow on top of this. It becomes like little cracks in this like overgrowth that we're seeing. So, I mean, that's why I work in black and white a lot for these like R&D type of things. Is just because you kind of, once you have a good base of like levels and everything, I mean, you can recolor it to be anything kind of afterwards. So, and it just makes it a lot easier to not really have to worry about colors or like hue or anything, and just working on the effect in black and white is really nice. When are the TikToks coming back? I don't know. I have like such a like on-off thing with making those. They're super fun to make for like a week, and then I just get like super bored of it, and I don't do them like for a long time. But I guess I can't say that they're just like never coming back, because I mean, it's fun to just make random ones. But for now, I don't have any plans to make any more. But yeah, it's funny that you have seen those. Yeah, they were super fun to like concept, but not many people that like followed me got them, and most people just followed me because I had like one animation that sort of like did decent numbers, and no one really cared for the odd niche 3D Cinema 4D Octane jokes, but they were fun to make, and like the 10 people that got them thought that they were fun. But no plans for TikToks coming up. Where were we? Oh yeah, and then our scale. So this, I mean, that was pretty quick. We didn't really have a lot, but there's a lot that we can kind of go through changing to get a little bit different effects. And in one of the other ones that I did, a nice thing, because this kind of like, you can see where the evolution of this is going to go, and if you're like breaking it down or like just thinking about it in terms of like the effects, you're like, well, that's just like a levels adjustment to kind of do a reveal. And that's where kind of stacking these different noise types on top of each other kind of came from. So if we just add another noise, just put it at the right on top to another fractal. And then these ones, I like to do in blocks with like just a lot less visual noise inside of them. So like maybe a detail of 3, and then just like cranking its contrast to get super sharp kind of masking for what was going to be after it, and then animating its brightness values to sort of also reveal the noise in a way that wouldn't just kind of feel like a levels adjustment. So this guy probably needs to be brought in scale up a bit in the transform. Yeah, that seems good. And then we can kind of animate its brightness in and out. So we just crank that down, set a keyframe on the brightness, and then maybe halfway through it's like totally revealed that there's no more masking. So we just keep sliding it. So we kind of get this little effect, which is like a lot more random than just our normal levels. And I use this a lot for just different like tech kind of things, is just like this just is such a more complex kind of reveal, and it takes like no time, but it does the job. And then something else we could probably do is even start it from its like normal block of just like 1, which does a nice job of revealing, and then animate that as well. So as we kind of go on in time, we get kind of like this infinite amount of detail being revealed as the clamp goes up, which is nice. And then from there, we just have to animate its evolution. So I just know that the animation I did on the base was 3 of kind of a 360. So each time you go 360, it adds another number. So I know that I can just type in 3, and that will match our same kind of animation speed of the noise below it. And this helps kind of because now instead of a static chunk here like we had before, now it's kind of moving all over, revealing different parts. And that by itself, I used this kind of noise blocking in the same kind of process, and you get this cool stuff where you get in those kind of where we added a little bit more complexity, you get these little chunks that move around, and as it fades away, it's kind of like it's getting eaten away. But that was not the kind of, I liked the blobs a little bit more. So if we just multiply this guy on top, now we get both, and then we can probably add a blur so that the edges of this guy aren't as crisp, which will help with the overall effect. Maybe a little bit more. And then just repeat edge pixels so we get rid of that air. If you look at this. So now we have, looks like we need our levels to, well, that'd be why. We haven't inverted anything. So we could maybe put this at the top because it's just masking out our shapes. Yeah, that will work a lot better. So now we get these guys, and you can see how that works once we put it in the new comp. So this is all the same, but our beginning is a lot more interesting because we kind of get these like little sections that start before everything just becomes a big blob, and then they all separate a little bit later. And then something else that's super crazy. And so this is kind of where I would like, this would be kind of the base of the recipe for this effect, where I know that like my noise is going to create, you know, the visual cellular type thing that I want after. And now it's just about adding different kind of effects into it. And so we can start doing that by just like, I just like start stacking adjustment layers and turning them on and off on and off for different effects afterwards. So if we go CC ball, these are kind of all standard things that you use for just like visual interest. So this, if we kind of crank down our size here and add in a little bit, oh, that's way too much scatter. So if we do that, we can also, so this also has an evolution, which is cool. So maybe it needs to be a little bit less. Yeah. So I'm also just going to animate that instability state, which is kind of like its own evolution. Looked like it had to be going a little bit faster. That's not nearly as enough. So maybe we double it again. Put it at 12. Yeah. So now those little guys are moving around a little bit. Maybe it can have a full one. Or something that would be nice is if we animate the scatter to, I mean, if we turn off this clamp, at the very end be clamping or scattering a ton. So we're not even close to our original kind of cell shapes. So maybe like 5. So we get these like chunks, and then they kind of just start to totally spread away from what we want. This may just be way too much visual noise for it. But we can also, we want that. We want that. Yeah, 5 seems fine. We'd also kind of animate this like distance, or ball size, I guess, to be bigger at the start. So it kind of encapsulates all of this, but with like a bumpy sort of feeling texture. And then by the end, we give them a lot more separation. Might be a crazy effect. It might just get way too confused at what's happening. And this could go under so that we still get the chunks on top. Nah, I like it more on top of this last effect. Cool. So we'll just clamp it, invert it. Nice. So that looks pretty crazy. I feel like this might just be, because now kind of similar to the scatter that we did before, all these little bits of black will kind of, it'll have to make a choice about how it blends all this, so we might just get way too much visual noise. Here we go. Jump over. It's going to be insane. Yeah. So now, because there's so much of this noise happening inside there and there's gradation there, we're just getting this kind of like muddled pool of like just doesn't even know what to do with it. Which is a cool effect to kind of break it up, but I feel like it kind of messes with the nice cell shapes a little bit too much. But we could, after that, just clamp this guy to have a lot less of a gradient. Or will that not work? Or I could just break After Effects. Just gonna not do that then. Hey, it's terrific. What's up? What is that about? Huh. John Colkin? I don't know what that is. I'm so lost on all of these emotes or emojis. Are they called emojis or emotes? I would assume that they are emotes. So that was a little bit too crazy. Just due to the fact that it has all these kind of, the CC ball is great except that it shades them, and that we do not want because it will just kind of make this muddy gray everywhere. So what we could do, what could we do to this? So if we wanted to break it up, what we could do on top of this, instead of kind of making more layers of noise, because we have this guy, which is great, and if we turn off his gradation, what does that do to our end effect? I kind of like that more. So if I lock this guy, make a new window. how do I make a new window? Oh, it's view. And then we go back. On. Off. So it's actually just blending those guys wherever it touches. I feel like off is better. Cool. So what we could do at the end of that noise is add a turbulent displace. And this is kind of the way that I adjust all this stuff. But I just want a horizontal displacement and a super small one too. And that will kind of introduce these like jagged lines. So on and off. They're not as crazy in there, so maybe we need to bring up the size of them. Yeah. Cool. So that works there. And this also has an evolution, so we can adjust this guy to about 3. And you can kind of see it there. Just like breaks it up a bit. It looks drastic there, but over here it won't be nearly as bad. So unlock that. Just play this for a couple of frames. I think I did this at, what is this even at? Yeah, 1920. That's like HD. So maybe we'll cut it in half. So this is our effect now with like a little bit of distress wherever it touches that mask. Yeah. So it just kind of warps our little mask to be less of a hard edge wherever it meets, which looks cool. Twitch emotes, that's what they're called. Cool. You learn something new every day. Glad to see the OGs around here. What's up? All 5 of you. I also have to go over kind of that we have to introduce 3 new streams at some point this month, because the goal is that we have left for Twitch is this stuff. So stream for 8 hours will be hit, which is great. But this one, stream on 7 different days. So maybe I'll do a poll after this on my Instagram of which different days. I mean, I already have it set up that hopefully in September we'll be doing Tuesdays and Thursdays at night around 9 p.m. or like 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I might do like a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Tuesday or something to hit the 7 different days so that we can get this. Which I don't even know what affiliate does. I'm so behind. I think that it is a good thing to get, so we will get it, hopefully. Because everything else, I mean, 66 of you, which is insane. I did not think that there would be 66 followers this soon, which is great. But just seems like if we have all of this already, this in the past 30 days makes sense to kind of just do a couple extra streams this month that weren't even planned. And I'll just have to figure out what those would be. But I'll put a poll up on my Instagram stories. So any questions, any things that you guys kind of want to go over with this? I mean, I could mess around with this stuff all day and all of the little effects that we're adding. But I was also wondering how this would look in 3D as like a map, because that was something that I've done before, is like generating these cool black and white things that just like, how do the boundaries form? So the boundaries between all of them are just coming from our clamp down here. So if we take off that noise mask, so it's just that without that, and without the invert. This is just our noise at the base, which by itself kind of has its own boundaries that it sets through its evolution, and then just inverting it so that we have like kind of these white walls in between where it was putting the black ones before, and then doing a really aggressive clamp in levels. So just like animating the histogram. So up here I have it totally clamped all the way up so that it's just total pure black. Then I let it animate down to something where it's like, if we want to create a lot more separated blobs, we just need to bring up the white to kind of do that. And you can see like each one of these, once the blur is put on top, will kind of be their own cell. So you just have to clamp that noise back up, and then we just animate this back to black afterwards. So you get like moments of like a big shape that kind of gets eaten away into little animated blobs, and then it animates back to black. Yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, a lot of people are asking for like a breakdown of this, and I felt like it didn't really deserve a full tutorial because like it's just noise and then a vector blur at the end of the day, really. Nothing that revolutionary, but yeah, just trial and error of different things. And so if we change this noise type, it works a lot at best in threads, but we can do it in like strings, and this actually gets a way weirder result. So we kind of get these blobs going everywhere. So maybe we take off the invert for this. So that will start us with like these crazy shapes. And then inside of this, with the vector blur set on top of it, we'll get kind of these sort of things. And that's kind of nice because those are like a little bit more organic. It's just that like thin edge. I don't really like that a lot. So I wonder what we could do to adjust that. So if we go into this guy, I guess we can just bring down the contrast of it. Yeah, but we'll always have it at some point. Let's bring that up here. I guess we could do that. Oh, that's crazy. What is happening? It's kind of like a scanline sort of thing. So we do that. That's pretty crazy. And then inside of the vector blur, woo, trippy. Yeah, so a lot of it is just vector blur. Vector blur is doing all the heavy lifting. You just have to feed it something that it wants in the way that it wants it to get these effects to work. Because, I mean, if you just have no clamp, just like your basic and at like 6, and then you feed it into vector blur, it's like cool, but it's not really doing anything like interesting. But yeah, like you were asking, it's just the cellular stuff just comes between like manipulating a noise pattern, and cranking down the complexity of it is the best way to kind of get that from the start, and then clamping it. These just don't look very blobby. That's why I like the noises that kind of keep it in like a grid. Let's bring this brightness back down. This like keeps it in a grid pattern, which will give you these like nice circular blobs. But if you did want to do something, and this was actually something that I came across, so like if you do want to use the blocks, because I mean they are cool, especially when you give them like a little bit of complexity. This is just like an interesting thing. But it's just not going to look very cool going into the vector blur because it's just a little bit too boxy. You don't get those nice cellular shapes. I mean, you do a little bit because it will blur it out. But a nice thing that you can do on that is if we take these guys off, we don't blur it. But with set mat, and I mean, this is why I kind of set it up. I mean, it does adjust the levels and like clamp it, but you could just do a choke after that, because now these chokers are reading that matte that was set, and you can kind of blur them into these blobs that are like still super hard edged and not like blurred, but this is a way to get a little bit more of an organic shape out of it. And I've done that a couple times for different things. So if we take that and then we blur afterwards, feed that in, you get a little bit more of an organic blobby parts versus our boxy parts. Just kind of clamps it a little bit better. So I think I did that for one of like the 3 tests that I animated. Yeah, so I have DE base and I have DE. How did you go from DE? How did you import DE? Oh, okay. So those, I just separated this build into 2 kind of comps. So DE base is just where I'm building the noise in its own comp, so that I could kind of animate it and not have to keep like flicking things in this other comp on and off. So yeah, this is just DE base is just kind of digital evolution base, which is just the noise right here that we're driving, that is driving the blur. And so it's just a comp set at the bottom, with the vector blur and the scale put back on top. So you could technically do this all in one, but the problem with that is the set matte. So if you have set matte, it's just an adjustment layer at the top of this stack, and then you do everything after it. So what I would normally do to avoid this would be to put a black solid at the bottom. Turn all these guys off. So without that guy there, this is what the set matte's doing. Is it actually removes the black from it because it's using luminance, and so you have to put a black behind it. But if this was built in a stack where you were doing the set matte as like an adjustment layer on top of all of these layers, there's no way to like put a back of black back behind it. So that's kind of where I did that, and it also just makes it easier to separate the noise into a separate comp to kind of build it on its own, but not necessary, and won't really adjust anything, because if you just flip that back, you're back to the same thing essentially, as long as you're not doing anything that needs like to have transparency as well. You could just render this with like a black background, and this looks pretty crazy. But yeah, that's the only reason that that is built that way. So we could go over to Cinema and kind of show what this does as like a height field. So I might just use the video that I'd already rendered as the kind of map that we're going to use, instead of having to sit here and wait for all of this to render out. So if we just get a plane, and this is kind of something that I've done a couple of times, just because working in black and white, it's like super interesting to see what it does in 3D for like masking and that sort of stuff. So we just go into a redshift material. That's taking a bit. Oh, I think our cinema has crashed. That's not good. No, it's back. Redshift doesn't like making materials, apparently. Then we just go textures, and I don't know if I've ever used an MP4 as the file, but we will see. Just go here, open that guy up. It's an animation, so I'll have to check all those simple detect frames. Start frame 2, end frame 2. That's not correct. Maybe I'll have to convert that into... I mean, I have to blur it anyways, so maybe we should do that anyways. So I'm just going to make this into an image sequence. So this animates on and off. It's all cool. We're going to get a little bit of artifacting from the scanline thing, because it's going to adjust the values. And that means that this will kind of be chunked into it. I don't know if I want to invert that, actually. This will give us those kind of raised up. That will look a little bit cooler. Gaussian blur. And then we just kind of have to blur it. Just so that, because if you bring in something that like has this many hard edges between the values, I feel like the blur gets a little bit upset. Or the height in using it as a height field, it gets a bit upset. So I think that that will work there. Let's just go from here. Let's give it like a couple frames. You can really see the scan line when it's inverted. And for anyone that wasn't here in the beginning, the Scanline Effect is super easy. So it's just a layer. So pretending red is our background. And if we do EE, we'll see the expression. And without it on there, I'm just going to copy this. And with our guy. So just putting a new solid, and I normally just like do a black solid. And then separating the position into X and Y. We're just going to put an expression on Y. And so wiggling is just, it's doing it 15 times in a second. So of our 30 frames, it's doing it like every other one. So that it's a little bit less chaotic. And then because we know that this comp at least is 1080 by 1080, it has to move either up 1080 or down 1080. And because we put it in the middle here, that means that it will like kind of pick random spots, like if you were filming something that had like scan lines on it, you would it wouldn't be able to get every single, if your frame rate was off, you would get kind of like little chunks that had different values on them. And so if we do that, then we get this like weird glitch effect where, with the transparency down, it just gives like a little bit more grunge on top of anything. So that's what's happening inside this video. And that's what you're seeing in here. So that's what those white bars are. So I wonder if that will be way too crazy for it, but hopefully not. So I think we can just go from here down. Yeah, let's go 80. Just N to cut that off. Then we can go to Media Encoder to do our PNG sequences. Yeah, that was kind of the idea, is like microorganism blobby things looking through like a microscope, and that's kind of why I animated the scale to go up, was because like if you were just like kind of notching in a little bit on like a microscope to like get like all these little microorganisms moving everywhere. So I'm just going to wait for that to load in. And After Effects actually has this weird thing where rendering out PNGs or PNG sequences is like the slowest thing it can do. It does not do it efficiently. So PNG. That all looks good. Just going to put it in the folder here. Digital Evolution. Oh, my computer's not happy about something. Media Encoder just died. Oh no. Darn you, Media Encoder. Maybe if we do it just through After Effects? No, Media Encoder should work. Don't know why it doesn't work now. It's that Adobe dynamic link that just kills it every single time. Stop trying to make it a GIF. Make it a PNG sequence. Okay, let's see how long it's going to take to do this. Shouldn't take that long. It's just a video that it's converting over. Okay, it'll be done in like 8 seconds. I was worried that it was going to take like a million years because sometimes After Effects just does not play along. Cool. So now we should be able to load that into our Redshift shader, and it should work better. Cool. So we have all of our frames, and it goes down to 56. 56? Thought we told it to go to 80. Oh well. That's fine. And then we go animation after it loads it in. Animation after it loads it in. Maybe I'll close After Effects. Maybe it's eating too much of the resources. Okay. So we have this. We need to detect frames. 30, 56. That is correct. Drop that into, well, we could have kind of like this darker rubber texture. Just add a little bit of roughness into it. And then we can make another one that's like metallic. Just cheat and use the aluminum. Then we can do a material blend. Put in metallic as like the base material, rubber as layer, and then we'll blend it in with this guy. Blend color. Cool. Did I do that backwards? I did do that backwards. We want metal to be the base, and then reveal black. Okay. If we load that up on this guy, and then just load in like a area light. Just gonna really quick, very basic, just so we can get some amount of like lighting on it. Go in here, get our redshift going. Brute force. You normally use IPC just with this guy like 2. Bring those up a bit. And then my like redshift, I just typically divide my highest by 4, which is like 256 here. And then sampling overrides. And this just is like a generic. This is what I do for most stuff. And it gets you decent times in renders, but all of this could be tweaked. But this is just to get us like a rough idea of what we're doing on our materials. So if we do that, there's nothing for it to reflect. Correct. Cool. Yeah. So if we go here, a little bit forward. Right. Cool. So that's working. Inside of there. And then we can feed this also into the bump. If we just get a bump node. Might need a gradient in between those, or a ramp. Just because what works for one thing does not always work value-wise for the other. We might have to clamp some stuff. And then this goes into... I have to go into both of them, technically. Go into that guy. Go into that guy. Ooh, clean this up. See how that's looking. So that looks pretty crazy. And then as these guys evolve around. And that's just maybe too rough for our rubber. Still want it to have like some lighting on it. So it kind of looks like it like erodes away. And that's just with bump. But we could go even further. Give this guy a couple. Well, let's look at what our... Yeah, we can give him a lot more subdivisions. That works. Maybe like 500. If I can, I like to not use the tessellation inside the redshift object tag. Just go override, give it some displacement. Take this guy and drop down that displacement node. And then we can load that up. Texture map. Then this can go directly into the output. Doesn't have to go into both of them. Yeah, so I mean, this guy off. They essentially just increases it a little bit. But this, when we move our camera, will actually show displacement. So if we change the displacement a little bit. Yeah. And then we gotta, I forget that there's always like so many places that you can change the actual displacement in. Yeah, that's fine. Cool. So that's looking crazy. And you're actually starting to see artifacts of the blurring that we did if you crank it a little bit too high. So let's bring that down. Yeah. But I normally don't, if I can avoid it, do it inside of Redshift. I mean, it's nice to use that displacement, but I'm going to turn that off. And turn it off here. Because then if we use the just like built-in displacement or displacer and hold shift as you hit enter, it will make it a child of the object that you're working on. What's happening if it's applied to like an organic form, like a jelly bean, when adding some SSS while keeping the bump map? I don't know. I was just looking at a friend's post and a shark egg, and it made me think of that. We could try that. So making it kind of with our black and white reveal, sort of like a more like SSS sort of thing. I feel like a plane will not be good for that. So let's instead get... just make a floor for it. And then make a wall for our backdrop. Because the one thing that SS needs is like actual lighting on it. So I'm gonna do this little guy. I don't use this a lot, but the add target, add null is really nice. So if we just make this null now in the center of the scene, we can swing this light around and it's gonna look at that. It's really nice to like really quickly make like even like lighting that like looks at your subject. So just make another one, and he's also gonna kind of keep that tag. So we get 2-point lighting. Bring this guy down a little bit. Let's see. what that does. Okay, so they're going to need to go up. It's 15. Oh my gosh. 50. 40. And like 25. Cool. Let's make ourselves a camera. Maybe we'll go like a nice 80. And then put our subject in there. So for now, we just do like a nice torus. This will kind of show our subsurface scattering a little bit better. I don't do a lot of subsurface scattering stuff inside of Redshift, or I mean like really ever, but we can test it out. So I mean, if we just drop this on, it's going to be not mapped properly. What could we do to map that better? I mean, we can just mess with the offsets, and I might just do that really quick just to get us in the ballpark. Or our texture isn't tileable either. So maybe it's better if we just cut our losses and use a cubic. I mean, we're getting this like edge up there. So we can just try to adjust it. Just tile it a little bit less. Yeah. Acceptable. Not amazing, but acceptable. So we're just going to do that. Oh. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not tiling like horribly, but... And we have these edges on either side. But for this, then we could go... And we know that maybe we're going to make 2 different SSS materials, and then like one will be a lot thinner than the other one. So we'll just work on this guy first. And then we'll blend them afterwards. So I'm going to take all this bump out first and just focus on the material. So we could just start already with, I know Jade is like SSS, and then we can kind of work on adjusting this a bit, or we could just start from scratch. With plastic. Nope, that's platinum. Okay. So to add subsurface. Oh man, I mess this up every time. Amount. We want a lot of it, but we don't really want this color. I'm thinking more of like a bluish tint to it. And then this is our like radius scale, right? So that means that our object is mostly solid, and this means that it's mostly subsurface. Yeah, give it a little bit more of like a gooey texture. And this will still like overall affect, yeah, everything else. So if we make this like a little bit weird. Oh, what is our scene scale even? Okay, so that's like a person. So this object is actually pretty big. Let's bring that down. That should affect our subsurface. This little tiny guy. So we have this like blue interior. That's like gooey. And then if we just copy this guy, and make like different kind of, I don't even know if I want to do SSS for the other one, because we could then just go down here and like make this like pink roughened like membrane. That's too much saturation. That will be weird. And then it also, I think it has like fake shadows on by default. Oop, not that guy. But then we can take that as our second material. This is our first one, right? Yeah. So he is in the right spot. This guy goes into... actually, he should be in our layer control. This will go in our base layer. Everything else, they take the bump map in for both. Feed that into this guy. Whoa, that's crazy looking. I think we accidentally got it backwards again. This should be on top. This should be on bottom. Yeah, and that would get that really weird mix of like the two colors coming together wherever we don't have like total white or total black. So if we close this down, that starts with our membrane. So that is not correct. I had it right the first time. This goes into layer. This goes in that one. Yeah, so we start with like our goop, and then over time gets infected in all these like little areas by all of the little glass bits. I don't even know if the bump now is showing up that much. We could probably crank that up. That looks very crazy. It'd also be interesting to do it with like emission. You could have this drive just like a glowing, kind of like burning part of something. But that's interesting. I should play with Subsurface more because that doesn't look nearly the way that it should. But I think also we just have too much color in there. Because if we made it like total glass, it would be very weird. Bring up our subsurface to actually be a solid. Very weird looking. Yeah, very abstract, very weird Instagram art. But I mean, all the cool stuff kind of looks like an iris actually, with it all like going into like the center. Very trippy. Just made the. Now we have like a crazy eyeball. Didn't have to do anything. Looks like a marble actually. Like a marble eyeball. Very weird. But pretty cool. Yeah, so that's everything I kind of wanted to cover with this guy. Yeah. So have a stream next Saturday as well. And then I'll put up a poll on my Instagram for the 3 other streams that we're going to do this month to kind of meet that like 7-day quota and hopefully check off all the boxes to affiliate. So thanks everyone for stopping by. The After Effects project file will be up on my site. The link is in the about. And that, I mean, it doesn't really use any third-party plugins. That was the whole point. So should work with everyone's After Effects. Yeah, for sure, Zach. Thanks for stopping by. But yeah, hopefully have a good rest of your guys' Saturday, and I will see you next time.